Out on the sun-scorched plains, a rancher checking his fences heard something impossible. A sound the desert should never make. 3 thin, desperate cries sliced through the silence. There, beside the still body of a dead bobcat, were 3 orphaned bobcat kittens. Barely 3 weeks old, they huddled together, trembling. Starving, freezing, and far too young to survive on their own, they stared up at him with eyes full of desperation. Their mother was gone, and they were on death's doorstep. He scooped them up and rushed them back to the ranch, but their tiny lives were fading fast. What does a bobcat kitten even eat? These 3 shouldn't have survived. But their fight had only just begun. Stay until the end for the moment no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Mojave Desert stretched endless and unforgiving in every direction from Troy Morrison's ranch, 20 miles northwest of Henderson, Nevada. The land had been in his family for 3 generations, passed down from his grandfather who'd staked his claim here in 1952, believing there was something worth protecting in this harsh, beautiful wilderness. At 62, Troy had spent the better part of 4 decades walking these same fence lines, checking water troughs, and learning the language of survival that every desert creature spoke fluently. That particular April morning started like any other. The temperature hovered around 58 degrees, perfect for the early morning rounds before the sun transformed the landscape into a furnace. Troy pulled on his worn leather boots, grabbed his rifle, more for scaring off coyotes than anything else, and headed out with his Australian shepherd Blue trotting beside him. The eastern fence line ran along a natural wash where flash floods occasionally carved new patterns in the sand. It was Blue who noticed something first, his ears perking forward, a low whine escaping his throat. Troy followed the dog's gaze and saw it, a mound of spotted fur lying motionless near a collapsed section of fence. "Stay back, Blue," Troy commanded softly, approaching with caution. Desert predators rarely abandoned their kills, and the last thing he needed was a confrontation with whatever had done this. As he drew closer, the scene became clearer. A female bobcat, maybe 30 pounds, lay twisted in an unnatural position. Blood had dried dark against her tawny coat, and the distinctive black-tipped ears that should have been alert to every sound were still. Troy removed his hat, running weathered fingers through his graying hair. The tracks in the sand told the story clearly enough. Coyote prints, at least 4 different sets, circling and attacking. The bobcat had fought hard. Torn sagebrush and scattered fur testified to her struggle. "You didn't deserve this," Troy murmured, kneeling beside the body. In all his years on the ranch, he'd seen death in many forms. It was part of the desert's rhythm. But something about this particular scene struck him differently. Maybe it was the way she'd fallen, clearly trying to reach something, her body angled toward a thick stand of chala cactus 20 feet away. Troy lifted the bobcat carefully, surprised by how light she felt. Her ribs were prominent beneath the fur. She'd been struggling to find food. As he carried her toward the cactus patch to find a suitable place for burial, a sound stopped him cold. It was thin, desperate, barely audible over the morning wind, a mewling cry that spoke of hunger and fear. Setting the mother's body down gently, Troy approached the cactus stand with newfound urgency. The crying grew louder, multiplying into a chorus of distress. He pulled on his thick leather gloves and carefully parted the vicious spines, peering into the shadows beneath. 3 pairs of eyes stared back at him, bright blue, wide with terror. The bobcat kittens couldn't have been more than 3 weeks old, their spotted coats still fuzzy with baby fur, ears barely beginning to show the characteristic black tips of their species. They huddled together in a shallow depression their mother had clearly scraped out, their small bodies trembling. "Lord have mercy," Troy breathed. He'd found orphaned wildlife before. Desert cottontails, even a golden eagle chick once, but never anything like this. These kittens were on death's doorstep. Their crying had weakened to intermittent whimpers, and he could see their breathing was shallow, labored. Moving with practiced care, Troy reached into the den. The first kitten, slightly larger than the others, tried to hiss, a pitiful sound that came out more like a wheeze. Troy wrapped his gloved hand around the tiny body, lifting it free of the thorns. The second came easier, too weak to protest. The third, the smallest, was barely moving at all. Troy tucked all three inside his jacket, feeling their cold bodies against his flannel shirt. Blue whined anxiously, sensing the urgency as Troy jogged back toward the ranch house, the mother's body temporarily forgotten in his haste to save what remained of her legacy. The kitchen became an emergency ward. Troy grabbed a cardboard box from the mudroom, lining it with old towels. He placed it near the wood stove, which he quickly stoked despite the warming day. The kittens lay in a pile, their breathing so shallow he had to lean close to confirm they were still alive. What did Bobcat kittens eat? Troy's mind raced through possibilities. He knew domestic cats could drink cow's milk in emergencies, but these weren't house cats. He tried warming some milk, diluting it with water, attempting to drip it into their mouths with an eyedropper he found in the medicine cabinet. Most of it dribbled down their chins. Hours crawled by. Troy canceled his plans to drive into town for supplies, instead maintaining a vigil over the box. He kept the stove burning steady, creating a pocket of warmth in the otherwise cool house. Every 30 minutes, he attempted the milk mixture again. By afternoon, the largest kitten, the one that had tried to hiss, began swallowing small amounts. "That's it, little trooper," Troy encouraged. "You fight for it." As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Troy finally saw improvement. All three kittens were breathing more steadily, and they'd consumed maybe an ounce of fluid between them. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, Troy barely slept. He dozed in his recliner, pulled close to the stove, waking every hour to check on them. Around 3 in the morning, he heard movement in the box. The largest kitten was attempting to crawl, dragging itself with uncoordinated movements toward its siblings. By morning, Troy knew he needed help. He loaded the box carefully into his pickup truck and made the hour-long drive to Henderson, where Dr. Margaret Sullivan ran the only veterinary clinic that handled exotic animals. The waiting room was empty when he arrived, carrying his precious cargo. Dr. Sullivan, Marg to those who knew her, was a tall woman in her 50s with prematurely silver hair and hands that could gentle the wildest animal. She took one look at Troy's exhausted face and the box in his arms and ushered him straight into an examination room. "Bobcat kittens," she said, not a question but a statement as she peered into the box. "How long have they been without their mother?" "Found them yesterday morning. Mother was killed by coyotes, near as I can tell. They were barely alive." Marg lifted each kitten with practiced efficiency, examining eyes, checking hydration by pinching skin, listening to hearts with a stethoscope that seemed comically large against their tiny chests. "They're about 3 weeks old," she confirmed, "severely dehydrated, malnourished. You did right bringing them in." She set up 3 small IV lines, a delicate process that required all her skill given the kitten's size. "These aren't domestic cats, Troy. You understand that? Even if we save them, they're wild animals. It's not illegal to keep them with proper permits, especially given your ranch status, but they'll never be pets." "I'm not trying to make them pets," Troy replied, watching the clear fluid drip into the tiny bodies. "I just want them to live." Marg nodded, her expression softening. "They'll need specialized formula. I can order it, but it's expensive. Feeding every 3 hours for the first month, then gradually less often. They'll need to learn to hunt, to be wild. It's a massive commitment." "I've got nothing but time," Troy said simply. The next weeks transformed Troy's life into a routine of bottles and formula, of tiny mouths learning to suckle, of watching for signs of illness or failure to thrive. He named them in those sleep-deprived early days. Trooper, for the largest male who'd shown such fighting spirit from the beginning. Lewis, for the second male who was calmer, steadier, following his brother's lead. And Anne, for the female, smallest but fierce, named after his grandmother who'd been the same way. The formula Marg had ordered cost more than Troy's monthly grocery budget, but he didn't hesitate. He set up a larger enclosure in the barn, with branches to climb and hiding spots to explore. At 4 weeks, their blue eyes began changing to yellow. At 5 weeks, they attempted their first pounces on the toy mice Troy dragged on strings. Blue, the shepherd, appointed himself guardian. He would lie outside their enclosure, alert to any disturbance, occasionally touching noses with the braver kittens through the wire. It was an odd friendship, predator and herding dog, but Troy had learned long ago that the desert made its own rules about such things. By 2 months, the kittens were eating solid food, raw rabbit and quail that Troy sourced from a supplier in Las Vegas. Their spots were becoming more distinct, their movements more coordinated. Trooper had developed a habit of climbing to the highest perch in the enclosure and surveying his domain with an expression of regal satisfaction. Lewis preferred ground level, stalking through the manufactured undergrowth Troy had created with sage and mesquite branches. Anne was the puzzle solver, the one who figured out how to open the simple latch Troy had installed, leading to a memorable morning when he found all 3 kittens exploring the barn. At 3 months, Troy made a decision that would define their future. Rather than keeping them confined, he began supervised outdoor excursions. Using a large fenced area behind the barn, he let them explore genuine desert terrain while maintaining safety from other predators. They learned to hunt grasshoppers and lizards, to navigate cactus and rock formations, to fear the shadow of hawks overhead. The first time Trooper caught a kangaroo rat on his own, Troy felt a pride that surprised him. These weren't his children, weren't even his pets, but he'd given them a second chance at life. Watching them develop their wild instincts while maintaining a careful distance was a delicate balance. Evenings became Troy's favorite time. He would sit on the porch, blue at his feet, watching the 3 young bobcats explore the immediate area around the house. They never strayed far as the sun set, always returning to the protected area as full darkness fell. Sometimes Trooper would sit just at the edge of the porch light's reach, his yellow eyes reflecting like coins, watching Troy with an expression that seemed almost contemplative. By 6 months, the bobcats were nearly fully grown. Their patterns had developed into the distinctive spotted coats that provided perfect camouflage in the dappled shade of desert vegetation. They hunted efficiently, though Troy still supplemented their diet. They came when he called, not like dogs, but with a wild dignity, choosing to acknowledge him rather than obeying. It was Dr. Sullivan who first noticed the change in Anne during a routine checkup Troy had scheduled. The female bobcat had been restless for days, pacing the fence line, vocalizing with sounds Troy had never heard before. "She's approaching sexual maturity," Marg explained, her hands gentle but firm as she examined the agitated cat. "The boys will follow soon." This is when things get complicated, Troy. They need their own kind. The social dynamics, the territorial behaviors, you can't provide what they need. Troy had known this day would come, had dreaded it even as he understood its necessity. That evening, he sat longer than usual on the porch, watching the three bobcats play fight in the cooling desert air. They were magnificent, healthy, strong, everything their mother would have wanted them to be. But Marg was right. He could see it in the way Anne distanced herself from her brothers, in the way Trooper had begun spray marking the fence posts, in Lewis's increasingly aggressive play. The Nevada Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sat on 40 acres of protected land an hour north of the ranch. Troy had heard of it but never visited until that weekend. The director, a woman named Sandra Washington, walked him through the facilities with obvious pride. "We have 12 bobcats currently," she explained, leading him past spacious enclosures that looked more like natural habitat than cages. Some are rehabilitation cases that will be released. Others are permanent residents due to injuries that prevent wild survival. Your three would have companions here, proper social structure. The enclosures were impressive. Huge spaces with natural vegetation, rock formations for climbing, underground dens for retreat. Troy watched two young bobcats wrestling in one enclosure, their movements fluid and natural. In another, an older male lounged on a sun-warmed rock, surveying his territory with calm authority. "They could have a good life here," Sandra said gently, recognizing the struggle in Troy's weathered face. "And you could visit, even volunteer if you'd like. We always need help with feeding and maintenance." The drive home was quiet except for Blue's occasional whine, sensing his master's heavy mood. Troy spent that night sitting in the barn, watching Trooper, Lewis, and Anne sleep in a pile as they had as kittens. They'd grown too large for such closeness, really, limbs overlapping awkwardly. But the bond formed in that cardboard box by the stove remained. Making the decision was the hardest thing Troy had done since burying his wife 5 years prior. These three wild souls had filled a void he hadn't acknowledged, had given him purpose beyond the simple maintenance of the ranch. But love, he'd learned, sometimes meant letting go. He spent a week preparing them, though he suspected the preparation was more for himself. Extra treats, longer evening observations, memorizing every spot pattern, every personality quirk. Trooper's bold leadership, Lewis's steady loyalty, Anne's fierce independence, he cataloged it all. The day of transfer came too quickly. Troy had borrowed a large animal carrier from Marg, though getting 3 adult bobcats into it proved challenging. They seemed to sense something significant was happening, showing more skittishness than usual. Finally, with patience and their favorite quail treats, he managed to secure them. The drive to the rehabilitation center felt both endless and far too short. The bobcats were quiet in the carrier, and Troy found himself talking to them, explaining why this was necessary, promising to visit, thanking them for the privilege of being part of their lives. Sandra was waiting with her team. They'd prepared a special enclosure for the three, separate from the others initially to allow for acclimation. It was beautiful. Desert willows providing shade, a small running water feature, multiple den sites, and plenty of vertical space for climbing. "You raised them well," Sandra said as they watched Troy's three explore their new space. "They're healthy, well socialized with each other, but maintaining appropriate wild behavior. That's not easy to achieve." Trooper was the first to venture out naturally. He moved cautiously but with purpose, investigating each feature of the enclosure. Lewis followed, staying close to his brother. Anne hung back, watching from the carrier entrance before finally stepping out with characteristic caution. "You can stay as long as you like," Sandra offered, but Troy shook his head. "Best to make it clean," he said, though his voice was rough. He watched as Trooper discovered the highest perch, a natural stone ledge with a view of the entire enclosure and the desert beyond. The Bobcat settled there, his posture relaxing as he surveyed his new territory. "You're home now," Troy said quietly, though he knew they couldn't understand. "You're where you belong." He signed the volunteer paperwork before leaving, committing to 2 days a week. Sandra smiled knowingly. She'd seen this before, the humans who couldn't quite let go completely. The ranch felt empty that night. Blue searched the barn, whining at the absent scents. Troy sat on the porch despite the cold, looking out at the desert that suddenly seemed too vast, too quiet. But somewhere in that vastness, he remembered, a mother bobcat had fought desperately to protect her kittens, had hidden them with her last breath. He'd simply finished what she'd started. His volunteer days at the center became the highlights of Troy's week. He learned the names and stories of all the resident bobcats, helped with feeding, cleaned enclosures, and assisted with medical care when needed. But he always saved extra time for his three. They recognized him. He was certain of it. Not in the way a pet would, running to greet him, but in subtle acknowledgments. Trooper would descend from his high perch when Troy approached, sitting at a dignified distance but facing him directly. Lewis would often mirror his brother's behavior, adding a slow blink that Marg had told him was a feline sign of trust. Anne remained the most aloof, but sometimes, when Troy sat quietly outside their enclosure doing paperwork, she would settle in the closest den site, her presence a form of acceptance. 6 months after their arrival, the center received 2 orphaned bobcat kittens, victims of a vehicle strike that had killed their mother. Sandra asked Troy if he'd lead their rehabilitation, given his success with Trooper, Lewis, and Anne. "You have the touch," she said. "Plus, your 3 could serve as role models once these little ones are older." The new kittens were even younger than Troy's 3 had been. Barely 2 weeks old, eyes still closed. Troy threw himself into their care with renewed purpose, applying everything he'd learned. The late-night feedings, the careful temperature monitoring, the gradual introduction to solid food, it all came back like muscle memory. When it came time to introduce the youngsters to the adult bobcats, it was Anne who surprised everyone. The female who'd been so independent, so fierce, became remarkably gentle with the kittens. She would lie near the fence separating their enclosures, purring, actually purring, when they approached. When they were finally introduced under supervision, she groomed them with a maternal patience that brought tears to Troy's weathered eyes. "She's remembering her mother," Sandra observed. "Or maybe she's becoming the mother she lost." The years settled into a rhythm. Troy continued his volunteer work, watching his 3 thrive in their environment. Trooper became something of an ambassador cat, calm enough to be visible when educational groups visited, though always maintaining his wild dignity. Louis paired off with another rescued female, their companionship a quiet, steady thing that reminded Troy of his own marriage. Anne helped raise 3 more sets of orphaned kittens over the years, her fierce nature gentling only for the young. The ranch remained Troy's home, but the rehabilitation center became his heart. He led fundraising efforts, helped build new enclosures, and became known throughout Nevada as the Bobcat Whisperer, a title he found embarrassing but secretly appreciated. Blue, growing older and grayer, would accompany him on volunteer days, lying in the shade while Troy worked, Occasionally raising his head to check on the cats he still considered his responsibility. On the 5th anniversary of finding the kittens, Troy stood at the same spot along his fence line where everything had begun. He'd finally buried the mother bobcat here, marked with a simple stone cairn. Desert wildflowers, purple lupine and golden brittlebush had grown around the marker, nature's own memorial. "Your kittens made it," he told the silent grave. All 3 of them. They're magnificent, wild and free, just as you would have wanted. A movement in the distance caught his eye. A bobcat, solitary and confident, picked its way along the wash. For a moment, Troy's heart leaped. Could it be one of his 3? But no, they were safe at the center, probably lounging in the afternoon sun. This was another cat, living the wild life that fate had denied his rescued trio, but that human intervention had replaced with something different but no less valuable. The bobcat paused, seeming to notice Troy, and they regarded each other across the space. 2 creatures who belonged to this harsh landscape in different ways. Then the cat continued on, disappearing into the same cactus stand where Troy had found those 3 desperate kittens years ago. Troy smiled, replacing his hat and heading back to the house. Tomorrow was a volunteer day. The center had just received another orphaned bobcat, this one from New Mexico. Sandra had already asked if he'd take the lead on its care. Of course he'd said yes. It's what he did now. Stood in the gap between wild death and wild life, offering a bridge back to freedom. Blue met him at the porch, tail wagging despite his arthritis. Inside, Troy could see the stack of wildlife rehabilitation manuals he'd been studying, the fundraising proposals for a new medical facility at the center, the photos Sandra had given him of Trooper, Lewis, and Anne in their enclosure. 3 success stories that had changed not just their own fates, but the trajectory of an old rancher's life. The Mojave sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, wild bobcats hunted and raised their young as they had for millennia. And at the rehabilitation center, 3 bobcats who should have died as kittens were living proof that sometimes human intervention could honor rather than diminish the wild spirit. Troy settled into his porch chair, blew at his feet, and watched the desert come alive with nocturnal possibilities. He thought of Trooper on his high perch, ever the sentinel. Of Lewis, steady and calm, probably grooming his companion. Of Anne, fierce and maternal, likely checking on whatever youngster currently needed her protection. They weren't his anymore. Had never really been his, if he was honest. But they were alive. And they were wild, and they were home. In the end, that was all that mattered. The empty place they'd left at the ranch had been filled with purpose, with the knowledge that one man's choice to stop and look, to care enough to try, had made all the difference. The coyotes began their evening chorus in the distance, the same species that had killed the mother bobcat all those years ago. But Troy felt no anger toward them. They too were just trying to survive in this unforgiving landscape. The desert had taught him that death and life were partners in an ancient dance, each giving meaning to the other. His phone buzzed. A text from Sandra with a photo of the new orphan from New Mexico. Tiny, spotted, eyes barely open, fighting for life. Troy studied the image and saw the future stretching ahead. More sleepless nights, more bottles of expensive formula, more worry and wonder, and eventually, if everything went right, more wild souls returned to their destiny. "We'll save this one too," he told Blue, who thumped his tail in agreement. As darkness settled over the ranch, Troy remained on the porch, planning tomorrow's trip to the center. He'd stop by to check on Trooper, Lewis, and Anne first. He always did. Then he'd meet the new kitten, begin the delicate process of keeping it alive, of raising it wild, of preparing it for a freedom its mother had died trying to protect. It was hard work, heartbreaking work, but it was also the best work Troy had ever done. In saving those 3 original kittens, they had saved him right back, giving him purpose in his sunset years that shone as bright as any desert dawn. The stars emerged one by one above the Mojave, ancient lights watching over an ancient land where the drama of survival played out every single night. And in that vast wilderness, because one rancher had chosen compassion over indifference, 3 bobcats lived and thrived, their legacy extending far beyond their own survival to touch countless other wild lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new orphans, new possibilities for restoration. But tonight, Troy Morrison sat content in the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, the story ends not with death by the fence line, but with life, abundant and wild and free.